So the Unsolved Mystery, they interview Michael Riconosciuto, one of the main characters, and Tony Casolaro and Anne Clank, who appear in our show.
And Bill Hamilton.
The founder of the
Promise
company.
Software.
Yeah. So,
but it's the show, just to give a background, it's mainly about kind of like our first episode almost. It's mainly about the scope of the story is Danny died under mysterious circumstances in a hotel room, and he was looking into this software program. That's what they mainly talk about.
Anyways, so at the end of the show, the sort of cliffhanger that it ends on is this account that people that were at Danny's funeral have of a man in military formal uniform, looks high-ranking, lots of medals, puts a medal on Danny's grave before it goes.
Walks away.
And doesn't say anything, and just kind of like approaches the grave, puts a medal on it, and that medal is presumably underground in the cemetery. In Fairfax or wherever.
If you're looking at the actual episode, there's usually 2 per thing, so it's halfway through.
Shuttle.
And Elliot Richardson.
There we go.
Here's
Here we
the
go.
funeral scene. Yeah,
All right, full
great.
screen this.
Yeah.
So
Is this a reenactment?
This is a
Obviously?
reenactment.
Yeah.
So they tell this story about there was a mystery man at the funeral who nobody knew from the family. Nobody knew who this guy was, and he shows up and he lays a medal down on Danny's grave. He puts a medal down on Danny's casket, and everybody's like, "Whoa! Like, was Danny like?" The implication is like, was Danny actually secretly working for some sort of intelligence operation or military, thing? Like, was Danny's life actually much deeper and darker than we even knew about?
And so it was just sort of like this like unsolvable.
Was the guy
mystery.
wearing all that military brass like that?
He's wearing his full uniform.
Oh, wow.
So anyways, basically, at this point, this is probably like 2012 or 2013, my earliest phase of doing research for the book, and basically, and also one thing that there is some writing about Danny Casolaro out there. There are 2 books, but they don't really go in. It's not like kind of like a traditional biography. Like one of them's kind of about just kind of pulls different newspaper articles and magazine articles and kind of is a sort of like collage of kind of different secondary source material.
Right.
And then the other one is Sherry Seymour's book, which is like a wild book, and that's her investigation into like what was going on the West Coast. And there's a little bit about Danny, but it's not a biography of Danny. So I've always found it interesting that he worked in computer trade publications. He published computer industry newsletters, and I thought that was interesting because a software scandal propelled him into this story. And that kind of like had never been dug into. And I thought it gave him credibility as a journalist. Like, this guy knew about software. There weren't a lot of reporters who knew about computer software back in 1991. Mm-hmm. So basically, I wanted to like kind of dig in and like really paint a picture of like what life was like leading up to him getting into the case and just writing about computers for this newsletter.
Called under the heading "Computer Age" was like the publication.
So I would look at the, old issues of it, and there'd be like on the masthead just names of different people that worked there. So I just started calling people that worked there, that lived in the Virginia area. And they'd tell me about what life was like working for this newsletter with Danny, and they'd tell me other people that worked there to call. And so I called this guy. I guess I'll leave his name out just for whatever reason. Yeah. And it was told to me that he worked in the print shop. They would print the newsletters and they'd mail them out every day or whatever.
Right.
And, I got zero expectations for this call other than, what was
Danny like?
What was Danny like? What was it like working with him? Mm-hmm. So, basically the guy picks up the phone and he's like, I've been waiting, however many years it had been at that point, 20 years for this call. And I was like, yeah? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, why? And he's like, well, I'm the guy. And I'm like, what guy? He's like, have you seen the Unsolved Mysteries program? I was like, yeah. And he's like, I'm the guy. And I'm like, what guy? And he's like, you know the guy in the military uniform who puts the medal on Danny's grave? And I was like, yeah. He's like, that was me. And I was like, well, why didn't you ever come forward? There's all this question about it. And he's like, look, if anybody's going to figure out what happened to Danny, they better be able to figure out who I am. You know what I'm saying? If you can't figure out who put the medal on the grave, like, you're definitely not going to figure out what happened to Danny, because this guy, he was there, you know? That was kind of his point. And he was like, you know, you found me. Good job. And so I was like, what's the story, dude? You got to tell me, why'd you do it? And,
Right.
And so basically he and Danny after work would like sit out in the parking lot of this kind of sort of business park in Virginia, and they'd have a beer after work. And they were very close friends. They didn't really hang out socially, but they were close at work. And Danny had told him at a certain point that he wished he had been in the military. He wished he'd gone to war because he wished he had gotten a medal. And this guy was like in horrible combat in Vietnam and had won many medals, and, you know, suffered from really bad PTSD that, you know, when we met with him later, it was very palpable.
Right.
So basically, when he went to go to the funeral that morning, he remembered Danny telling him about how he wished he'd gotten a medal. And he decided to put on his military formal uniform. He was retired. He obviously worked at the print shop now. Mm-hmm. And he brought his best medal, and he gave it to Danny.
Wow. That's pretty wild, man.
We interviewed him.
Really sweet guy.
Couldn't fit it in the movie.
It was like, to bring that story up, we'd have to go into the whole Unsolved Mysteries thing. We had so many timelines and things, and it was like,
it
doesn't
hard.
get us any closer to actually solving the things we set out to solve, that it just kind of sat on the cutting room floor. But I love that story, and he's such a sweet dude that I kind of, you know, I miss not being able to put that in the movie just because he's such a cool guy.
But now it's a concrete exclusive.
Yeah. Concrete exclusive, baby. Yeah, one of my buddies who he used to be produce documentaries for Vice back in the day, and he put it to me best. He goes, editing, especially stories like this, when you're editing, he's like, it's just deleting. Just go through and start deleting shit. Yeah. And I imagine for a story that takes this long, like deleting stuff has got to be really hard.
Painful. Yeah.
What was the part for you that was the hardest to remove from the final cut?